Hi everybody, let me welcome you all to this module on Visual Studio 2010 Ultimate. I'm really excited today to be talking about Visual Studio. So what I'm going to be doing over the next 30 minutes or so is give you an introduction to the Visual Studio product family. So before we proceed any further, kindly allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tejasvi Kumar. I work as a developer technology specialist. I focus on Visual Studio and the related technologies. My email alias is tejkumar@microsoft.com. And today I'm going to show you the capabilities, or rather talk about the capabilities in Visual Studio 2010, give you a very high level overview of what this platform can bring to you from a delivery perspective. With that, let me give you a very high level overview of Visual Studio, the product family. So you must have seen the slide before, but nevertheless, I want to take around about a couple of minutes and walk you through some of the key components that comprises of this platform. Right at the bottom, you have Team Foundation Server. Team Foundation Server, just imagine this to be your central repository. So all of your digital information, all of your project-related data, everything would basically get into this Team Foundation Server. So that's your central repository. This gives you, the project manager, the ability to actually get all the visibility in that project. There's a bunch of reports that we actually package in the Team Foundation Server, so which is very useful for the project managers and the delivery heads. At the same time, from a developer's perspective, you have source control, so you can actually go and version control your sources, and then you can actually trigger your builds. We have continuous integration, which can be kind of automated the whole process. So we have automatic the build process. We have a bunch of capabilities specifically around reporting. We also have introduced a new technology that we call as lab management. So lab management is all about your test environments, virtualization. So I'm going to talk about that in a little while as well. From a Visual Studio perspective, which has to be installed on the workstations, we have three core components or three separate editions. So we have a Visual Studio Professional, we have a Visual Studio Premium, we have a Visual Studio Ultimate. So Visual Studio Professional is for like really small teams, probably not very mature in terms of development activities. And Visual Studio Premium is really meant for those people who have some amount of complex development happening. It's really targeted towards developers and testers. So people who are fairly large in size, and people who are probably distributed in across multiple locations. And Visual Studio Ultimate is the top-notch technology from Microsoft from a development platform perspective. So this is the tool which gives you all of the capabilities. So think of this as like a Russian doll. So right at the top, you have the Visual Studio Ultimate, and then you have the Visual Studio Premium. Finally, you have the Visual Studio Professional. So that's how it basically stacks up. At the right-hand side, you actually see Test Professional. Test Professional is a new technology that we have actually introduced as part of the 2010 product family. So I'm going to be talking about Test Professional quite a bit. And we have a bunch of integrations between Visual Studio and MPP, or it could be Excel, or it could be like making available whatever I'm talking about on the web interface. So there's a bunch of capabilities specifically around integrations. There's a bunch of extensibility points as well. So today specifically, I'm going to be giving you early insights. I'm going to introduce you to the Visual Studio product family over the next half an hour. Let me, through this slide, try and explain to you what each of these Visual Studio editions basically offers to you as a developer, or as an architect, or as a tester. So Visual Studio Ultimate basically has introduced a bunch of capabilities specifically around debugging. It could be from a testing perspective. We have a bunch of capabilities specifically around architecting your solutions, test case management. So we have a lot of stuff offered, new stuff that we've actually introduced as part of 2010. In Visual Studio Ultimate. So Visual Studio Premium is a subset of Visual Studio Ultimate. So Visual Studio Premium basically targets towards the developers. So as a developer, you have this ability to actually go and write code. You can actually go and design your databases. You can actually go and write your schemas, whatever changes that you might have to do on that particular database schema. So you have a bunch of capabilities specifically around database development. You have capabilities like going and creation of the test cases, the code coverage, it could be from a quality perspective, going and figuring out any bottlenecks in the application. So we have a profiler in Visual Studio Premium. We have capabilities where we could actually go and, create your scenarios from a testing perspective. So all of that is packaged as part of the Visual Studio Premium edition. Finally, at the bottom, you have Visual Studio Professional, which is really meant for the developers. It has a bunch of capabilities specifically around going and writing applications. Either it could be for the cloud, it could be from a SharePoint development perspective. So Visual Studio Professional is really meant for those developers who want to go and write rich applications. And you have a bunch of new capabilities specifically around the IDE. It's all based on Windows Presentation Foundation, capabilities around Silverlight development, so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of capabilities that we've actually introduced as part of Visual Studio. So Visual Studio Ultimate is right at the top. Visual Studio Premium is the mid-tier product that we provide for mid-sized teams, and right at the bottom you have Visual Studio Professional, which really targets those developers, small teams, less complexity. And in terms of testing, right, we've introduced a new technology. I'm like really passionate about this particular technology that we call as Microsoft Visual Studio Test Professional. So Test Professional is a brand new technology which was not available in the past, and this specifically focuses on manual testing activities. So it gives you the capabilities to actually go and manage your test cases, go and create your test cases based on the requirements, go and create the specific test cases and establish that old traceability. You can actually go and file bugs against a specific a failure that you actually see as part of the test case execution, so on and so forth, right? So Visual Studio, the Test Professional is a new technology. I'm going to talk about that as well in just a little while. We have introduced something called lab management. This is specifically for the testers. So lab management gives you the capabilities to go and create those test environments on the fly. So if I am a test engineer and I need to test my application on multiple platforms, I could very easily go and create those different test environments that I would probably require. One could be, testing your application in IE7, it could be IE8, it could be, Firefox, whatever version and stuff like that, right? So you can actually go and create these different environments very quickly. That's number one. Number two, you can actually go and execute your test cases within these environments. And if there's a failure, what I can do is I can take a snapshot of this environment. I can send it back to the developer. Today we have this classic problem, right? You have the developers and you have the testers. And unfortunately, whenever a developer receives a bug from the tester, the developer, the first reaction is like, it works on my system. I don't know what this person is really talking about. So these are classic situations. We call it as, no more, no repro, between quotes. So you've gone are the days where the developer cannot reproduce the problem whenever a tester files a bug. So it's here fairly straightforward. So you can actually take a snapshot of the environment, send it back to the developer. So there's a seamless integration between the developers and the testers. The flow of information, the flow of data. So you can actually take a screenshot. You can actually go and capture all the videos of whatever the tester does. All of those details can be packaged and sent across as part of the bug that is actually filed by the tester. It's a fantastic, fantastic technology, and it's going to really help you from a productivity perspective. Right at the bottom there, you have Team Foundation Server. From a new capability perspective, we've actually introduced a bunch of new features, specifically around the build process. So we have this capability that we call as the Gear check-in. I'm going to talk about that in just a little while. We have a bunch of capabilities specifically around agile based development. So Team Foundation Server, I'm sure like a lot of you all have used this technology in the past as well, but we've actually introduced a lot of features specifically around reporting, specifically around the build server, specifically around scale. So these are the things that I'm going to be talking about. So this is at a very high level what Visual Studio 2010 as a product family offers to you. So today during my talk, I'm going to focus more on Visual Studio 2010, the ultimate version. So I'm going to basically take a few themes. You can actually see the key focus areas from a technology standpoint, right? So we are actually focusing on application quality. That's number one. Number two, we are focusing a lot on integration. So we have this whole environment that we provide, that we have packaged for you folks. Everything is integrated here. Gone are the days where you have to toggle between multiple tools and interfaces, right? So here everything is like, in one single development environment. The third important thing is architecting your solutions. So gone are the days again where you had to rely on third-party tools or other technologies to actually go and build your solutions, your prototypes, so that you could actually go and share those prototypes with your customers. So we have a bunch of capabilities specifically introduced in the Visual Studio platform around architecting your solutions. Finally, from a overall visibility standpoint, there's a bunch of reports that you actually get from a cost perspective. You can actually lower the cost. You can actually improve the overall productivity. End of the day, it's faster time to market. So that's the, that's the bottom line. So end of the day, whatever we're basically providing to you folks, it's about how you can actually go and market your solutions to your customers very quickly. So that's the kind of focus that we have from a Visual Studio perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this whole story, of what Visual Studio as a platform provides. The first thing is from a quality perspective. We all know about quality, right? The importance of quality. So we've packaged a bunch of capabilities in the Visual Studio environment that specifically helps you from a quality perspective. So let me walk you through some of these key capabilities that we've introduced. The first thing is debugging. So if you're a developer, you can relate to what I'm talking about. How much of time do you spend in a day trying to debug a problem? Think about it. Or rather, let me rephrase that question. How many lines of code do you write in a day? The responses I've been getting is, in the past, people say 15 lines of code, some people say 30 lines, some people say 40 lines. It really, depends on your environment, right? But the point is, I've got some industry statistics as well, which says 27 lines is the average, the number of lines of code that is actually written by the developers. So given this scenario, the next question is, so what do the developers do? They write around about 27 lines of code. Obviously, they're like, trying to understand the requirements. They go and, implement those solutions. But there's a bunch of errors which have, probably creeped in, to the quality assurance team. So all of these have been, filed as bugs. It comes back to the developers. So going and fixing these problems, right? So it's really important, and that's where debugging comes in the picture. So what we've done as part of Visual Studio platform is we've introduced this fantastic capability where you can actually go and debug or identify these bottlenecks in this application very quickly. So take a scenario. So in the past, what I was doing as a developer is I would actually go and insert a breakpoint. So assuming that, okay, my problem could be occurring at a particular point in time, I would actually go and insert a breakpoint. I would then start my application in the back end. I would then go and interact with that application. When it reaches that particular breakpoint, I can actually go into my code in one single direction. And you cannot really go backwards in time, or you cannot go to the previous state of that particular application, after the execution of that particular application. But we've introduced a capability that we call as IntelliTrace that gives you the ability to actually go backwards in time as well. It's going to really help you from a productivity perspective, especially with regards to debugging. So I could actually go and execute my application. I could go and pause. So in the backend, what we do is we go and instrument on the fly your code, and then we give you a bunch of information pertaining to which thread was executed at what particular point in time, what were the exception statements that you actually got there. You could actually go and double click and get into the line of code which was actually causing that particular problem. What I can also do is I can actually go backwards in time. So imagine a situation where you want to understand the return values. So I could actually go and get all these details. I could understand which variable contained what data. Did it actually go into the if statement, or did it actually go into the else statement? So I can actually look at these conditional statements. Today we have these classic problems, right? I don't know which path it has traversed. But here I have this complete ability to go backwards, understand which route my application was, took to, as it was executing. So I can actually get this entire detail through this capability that we call as IntelliTrace. You can actually take this one step forward as well. What I can do is, if I have this capability enabled as part of my testing process. So imagine a tester is executing the test case. A tester, when he or she files a bug, I can actually capture all of these details, right? Whatever happened to that particular application during the execution time, attach it as part of the bug and send it back to the developer. The developer can open these IntelliTrace log files, and what happens magically is it actually opens Visual Studio in a debug mode. So this person would then be able to go right to that particular line of code where probably that problem, actually occurred. So on one side, you have like, a complete black box. You have no idea about the code. The tester is going and executing the test case. And the tester basically sees that there's a problem, and the application is not functioning the way it's supposed to be functioning, files a bug, and then magically, based on the interaction on that particular application, the developer gets to see which line of code probably was getting executed at that particular point in time. All of this is happening through this IntelliTrace log files. It's an amazing capability. The second thing is we have this regression scenarios, right? We call this capability as test impact analysis. So imagine you have like around about 100 or 200 test cases, and you have probably gone and fixed a small bug in that application. So once that bug has been fixed, right, it's probably a couple of lines of changes, or you've introduced a new line of code there in your application. Small change. Should you really re-execute all of those 100 test cases, whatever you currently have? Waste of time, right? So what we've done here is, magically, this technology will tell you all of these 100 test cases, which are the impacted test cases, because you made the small change in your application. It actually tells you this particular test case or these few test cases have to be re-executed because the change that you made in that application are impacted in these test cases. So you can only focus on those test cases, re-execute those test cases. So again, it's a very, very cool capability, and this is again part of the Visual Studio core platforms. So all of these capabilities that I'm actually talking about, think of this from an individual perspective. So as an individual, if you have to go and do debugging, or if you have to go and do some amount of regression or re-execute your unit test cases, life becomes very easy for you. And finally, we have a capability that we've introduced as part of Visual Studio, where as a developer, you can go and record your scenarios. We call that capability as a coded UI test. So if I have written a web-based application and I want to go and record a few scenarios to make sure that whatever implementation I've done actually works the way it's supposed to be working, some amount of validation. We normally do this, right, very ad hocly. But here, what we provide is we provide a very structured way of going and doing these kind of testing that you would normally do in an ad hoc manner. So we have this capability to go and record your scenarios. I can then go and do some amount of validations and re-execute these test cases, as and when you make some changes there from a regression perspective. Coded UI testing is really meant for specialist testers or for developers themselves. So it's not really targeted towards generalist testers or manual testers, because you would require some amount of scripting knowledge here in the back end. So coded UI test again is a very, very powerful capability which will help you go and create those scenarios. It's like record and replay those scenarios. So that's the way it basically helps you with regards to your day-to-day development activities. From a test perspective, right, we have introduced this capability that we call as Test and Lab Manager. And today we have done a bunch of studies. When we built this technology, right, we actually did a bunch of surveys, and based on those results, we actually went and built this technology. What we focused on really is that particular segment that we call as manual testing segment, and that's close to 67% of the testing work that actually happens in the industry today. It's a huge segment, and unfortunately, the vendors, the tools vendors, are really focusing on the other segment, which is the balance 33% or so, which is the specialist testing segment. So what we've done is we've introduced capabilities specifically for that manual testing segment. So we've introduced a brand new user interface. That's the first feedback that we got. So we got a bunch of feedback from the testers saying that Visual Studio is excellent, but it's perceived, or it's really meant for a developer. It has a bunch of different menu options. I don't really require something so complex or complicated. Developers will probably disagree with me, but I'm purely talking from a tester's perspective. Testers want a new user interface. They want something which is very simplistic in nature, not too many compilers and stuff like that. So we've taken this feedback, and now we've actually gone and introduced a new tool itself, which we call as the Microsoft Test Professional, which is really targeted towards the manual testers or the manual testing segment. So you can actually go and record your scenarios, you can do validations, and what you can as well do here is you can magically convert these manual test cases into a coded UI test case, which I spoke about just a little while back. So on one side you have this manual tester who has like a bunch of different test steps. So when that person goes and executes each of those test steps, right, you can then if you are from a regression perspective, you can actually go and convert those actions. We capture those actions in the back, and I can convert those actions into a coded UI test script. And obviously, in the back end, we will have .NET, C# or VB.NET, or it could be C++ managed as well. So it goes and magically converts everything into a back-end code, and then you have the ability, you have the power to go and tweak around with those test cases to make it a lot more richer from a regression perspective. And we also have introduced something called as the lab. We call it the lab manager. So the lab manager gives you the ability to create these different test environments. So as part of your testing process, right, what you can actually do is execute these test cases within those environments that you would create in these lab manager. So on one side, you have a virtual environment. So this virtual environment would probably comprise of different environments. Treat this as a library of templates. So each of these templates would probably be one environment. I can actually, as a tester, go and check out a specific environment, and then I can, as part of my build process, go and, deploy those builds into that particular environment. Once it is deployed there, I can actually go and automatically start executing my test cases within that particular environment. And then if there's a point of failure somewhere, everything is audited, everything is recorded there. So tomorrow morning, you can come back, you can actually look at the results, everything, everything is like automatically popping up for you in terms of whether the test case failed, whether everything was successfully executed, stuff like that, right? So that's about the lab manager. So using this new technology called Microsoft Test Professional, you can actually go and execute your test cases, you can plan your test cases, you can file bugs, you can map requirements to specific test cases. At the same time, you can also manage the lab setup in the back end. So this is the interface that you would use to actually go and manage your lab environment. Finally, the lab itself. So from a lab perspective, we leverage the virtualization technology that we have in Microsoft. So you must have probably heard about System Center Virtual Machine Manager, right? So what we have here is the, on one side we have the development lifecycle, the other side we have the virtualization technology. I think we are the only company who have this capability now, where we've seamlessly integrated the development environment with the virtual technology in the back end. So on one side, everybody's talking about virtualization, because you want to optimally use the hardware, right? That's one side of the story. Other side, you have the software development world. So today, in a classic situation, right, you have this project, and this project makes a request for an hardware, they get an hardware. Typically what happens is this hardware is locked in a room, and you're supposed to go into that particular room, and that's controlled by you folks, right? You go and execute your test cases. First of all, you go and configure the environment, then you basically go and execute the test case. And then if there's a failure, again, you have to recreate the environment to make sure that that bug has been fixed and stuff like that. It's a very challenging task. So what you can do here is you can basically bring in virtualization. On one side, you have a big hardware, so you can optimally use the hardware. So you're probably creating 4 or 5 separate environments. You're probably sharing this hardware across multiple teams. Secondly, you're creating these bunch of templates, and then you're basically going and checking out these different environments that you would require for the execution of your test case, in a specific environment. So all of this is very well managed. It's very easy to create these environments. You can actually on the fly go and create these environments. And then if you want to take a previous snapshot or restore the state of that particular environment, just click a button. That's it. It's as simple as that. So the lab management capabilities, especially with the integrations with the software development lifecycle, can really help you to become productive, to optimally use your hardware. And from an overall automation perspective, you can achieve a lot of automation here. Finally, web and load testing. So we have a lot of companies today, doing performance testing of their web applications. So you need to obviously build a solution that is scalable, right? You have an hardware and probably need to go and simulate a specific virtual user population on that particular application on that particular hardware. And your objective is to make sure that the response times and whether the hardware is actually scaling to that particular load, all of those things have to be controlled. It has to be like within the scope of the the SLAs that you've actually worked with your customers or the end users. So given that backdrop, Visual Studio has capabilities today to actually go and simulate that load on that application. So you have this ability on one side to go and record your scenarios, the next thing that you can do is you can go and simulate load on that particular application. And from a cost perspective, believe me, I think we are the most competitive in this industry today. Extremely competitive. I did a study very recently wherein we saved hundreds and thousands of dollars for a particular customer purely on load testing. So it gives you a bunch of capabilities, and we've done a lot of work internally at Microsoft. Hotmail.com, for example, is completely tested on Visual Studio. So from a project management perspective, again, there's a bunch of capabilities. Most importantly, as a project manager, you would normally use interfaces like MPP, or you would probably use an Excel sheet and stuff like that. We have this very cool integrations between the Visual Studio and the Team Foundation in the back end and these environments. And what we've done as part of 2010 is we've introduced a lot of capabilities specifically around managing your projects, a lot of reports, a lot of dashboards that we provide out of the box. So you can actually go and plan your iterations. We provide a bunch of templates. You can actually leverage these templates to actually go and plan your next iteration using the historical information and stuff like that. So from a project manager's perspective, we also give you a SharePoint portal. So every project that you would create in the Visual Studio environment, you actually get a portal automatically created for you. So through this portal, you have all of the dashboards, all of the reports, all of the information, everything available for you. You can also share these reports, share this information with your senior stakeholders. So they don't have to really get into a Visual Studio shell. They can just log into this particular portal. Everything has authentication and stuff like that. You go and have a look at where you stand in terms of your delivery life cycle. From an integration perspective, integration is one of our biggest advantages. So we have one common development environment, and through this environment we provide a bunch of capabilities. And let me just kind of talk about a few of those capabilities. The first thing is like the collaboration hub. So you have this backend repository that we call as the Team Foundation server, right? So Team Foundation server actually is one repository, bunch of information residing in this particular repository. So all of this data basically flows across your development lifecycle. So if a project manager wants some information, that information is available for you straight away. From a developer's perspective, if the developer is going and writing code, in the back end there's a bunch of data that we actually automatically capture. So that person might create a unit test case that is automatically captured in the back end, right? And the test case, the results, that is automatically captured for you. Have you kind of, as part of the test execution process, have you achieved the code coverage which has been set for that particular project? There could be a situation where you have like 67% code coverage has to be achieved before it is released from the development stage to the the quality assurance stage, or from the development stage to the testing stage and stuff like that. So here you can actually go and enforce these kind of policies through these capabilities, all because of Team Foundation server in the back end, all because there's one common integrated development. And from a transparency perspective, everybody knows, everybody has access to the data, the information that he or she requires based on their permissions, based on their roles in the organization. So if you're a developer, you actually get to see whatever you're supposed to be seeing. As a project manager, you actually get to see whatever you're supposed to see and stuff like that. So all of that information is sent across to you depending on your roles. And additionally, we've introduced a bunch of capabilities specifically around development of, say, it could be a Windows 7, it could be SharePoint, it could be cloud computing, it could be going and developing applications for your Azure platform. So Visual Studio today, kind of caters to all of these different environments, cutting edge technology. So technology keeps evolving, right, day in, day out, and we've introduced all of these capabilities in Visual Studio, which will help you go and build these applications for those newer systems, newer servers and stuff like that. So everything is available here. The other thing that we've actually done from a Visual Studio standpoint, specifically around database, right? So there's this huge gap. So today we have a bunch of developers who are actually going out of Visual Studio to do their database development activities. And this is not a very clean process. I'll give you an example. So if I'm a developer and I'm supposed to go and create a new table, typically what I would do is I would get into SQL Management Studio. I would go to SQL Management Studio, I would actually go and create the tables there, and then I would probably go and click a button which will go and deploy my schema changes into the production environment straight away, which is very ugly. So what we have in Visual Studio today is the ability to go and create new projects, which we call as database projects. So I can actually go and create these projects. I can actually go and import my schemas if it is already residing in a production environment, and if I have to go and work on those schemas to introduce, a small change in the particular schema, I can get those schemas into Visual Studio. I can work on those changes. I can compare my schemas and then go and deploy whatever changes I've actually done into my staging server. I can in the back end go and version control all of these assets, the schemas, the database schemas. I can actually go and put it in a source control system in the back end. So everything is very, very structured here, very organized compared to what you were actually doing in the past. The good news is some of these capabilities were already available in the past, but we've also, through partner companies, now give you the capability to actually go and work on Oracle schemas and the DB2 database schemas as well. So these are things that we've actually introduced as part of the 2010 product family, and these are coming through partner solution. From an architecture perspective, I'm really excited. There's a bunch of capabilities that we've introduced. So gone are the days where you have to rely on third-party utilities or technologies just to kind of work on your UML. UML modeling, which is fairly popular in the industry today, right? So we've kind of finally embraced UML. So through Visual Studio, you have the capability to actually go and create your class diagrams. You can actually go and create the sequence diagrams. You can actually go and create the use case diagrams and so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of capabilities specifically around UML. So you can actually go and leverage these capabilities to the Visual Studio 2010 environment. The other important thing is take a situation where you have an architect. The architect at a very high level says, this is my architecture. I have my user interface here. I have my business logic here. I have my database tier here. I do not want any of my developers to directly make a call from a UI layer into my database tier. It is not allowed. But how do you really control, these kind of, the policies or these kind of rules that the architect has actually set for that particular project? How do you make sure that developers, when they go and implement the solution, follow these guidelines? Is there a way to do it? We've introduced capabilities specifically around validation of your architectural diagrams. So again, it's available in Visual Studio, the Ultimate Edition, where as an architect, you have this high-level architecture, and then if there's any or breakage of those rules or guidelines that you've actually set for that particular project, the developer will not be able to check in the sources or the build. During the build process, these architectural validations are basically identified, and you get to have that particular build actually breaking, and the developer can actually get a notification saying that, boss, there's a problem here, this is the architectural guidelines, and you've actually broken that particular guideline. So you actually get those kind of insights. It's all automatically done through the tool, so you don't have to really have humans go and do these validations themselves. Today there's a huge problem. So at a very high level, that your solution can do a bunch of features, bunch of capabilities it offers basically to the end users. But if you want to introduce a new capability, you want to understand at a very low level, what are these dependencies, which particular class is dependent on which particular assembly, and so on and so forth. Everything is basically available for you here. We also have things like gated check-in that we've introduced as part of the Visual Studio 2010 product family. So today, if you follow agile methodologies, for example, right? Let's take one example. If you have continuous integration enabled, and if you want to make sure that whenever anybody checks in the sources, the build triggers in the back end. Once the build triggers in the back end, the sources basically go into the source control system. But you want to make sure that only if the build passes, my sources have to go into the source control system. How do you ensure that? So we've introduced this capability called gated check-in, which ensures that whenever a person checks in the sources, continuous integration is enabled, and only if the build passes, the changes will get committed in the source control system. Otherwise, it will not get committed. There's a temporary space that we've actually created, which we call as the shelf set. So all the sources will reside in the shelf set, and only if the build passes, the changes will get committed in the source control system, which is an amazing capability. Finally, you have obviously the reverse engineering capabilities. You can actually, you have the bunch of sources here, and you can, from the source, go and generate some sequence diagrams and stuff like that. So these capabilities are available for you. The other interesting thing that we have done through Visual Studio 2010 is we've brought in Expression Blend 3. It's available through MSDN subscriptions. So what it provides is it provides the capability for you to go and develop those prototypes. So today, before you actually go and write code, right, you have to build these prototypes so that you can actually show it to the end users. And only if the end user is convinced about the prototype, you can actually then go and start implementing that particular application. So you can kind of relate to this electronic napkin scenario, right? Take a napkin. So we spend a lot of time, with these napkins. We go and at a very high level, do these prototypes and say this is what I want and stuff like that. So we've actually given the same capabilities. We call that electronic napkin capabilities. And then you have the design UI flows. You can actually understand the flow of, within that particular application. And then finally you can go and replay these prototypes, and you can actually go and present to your stakeholders, the business users, in terms of how your application will eventually look like and stuff like that. So these are very cool capabilities which will help you, which will help you, and especially with regards to the requirements, right, to make sure that the end user or the customer actually gets what he or she has in mind. So the prototypes can be very useful from that perspective. Finally, folks, Visual Studio 2010, there's a lot of folks asking me this question, like, when is this going to get released? Visual Studio 2010 is going to be released on the 12th of April. There's a huge launch that we are doing as part of this release, which is going to be across the globe, including in India. And in India, we have this in Bangalore. So we've clubbed this launch with TechEd. So 12th of April, so I'm looking forward to meeting you in person on this particular day, which is a very, very exciting day for us in Microsoft. As part of the launch, Microsoft is known to do this, and there's a bunch of surprises, especially for the current users of Visual Studio, right? So you might be wondering, okay, this is cool. So this guy is really talking about some amazing capabilities, but how do I transition into the Visual Studio 2010 product family? I'm sure a lot of people must be wondering, right? We have a fantastic offer going on, which we call as Ultimate Offer. So what we will be doing as part of this offer is we will transition your existing Visual Studio licenses to the 2010 product family, and we will actually move you up the ladder. If you have a current flavor of Visual Studio, we will be moving you up the ladder to the next higher version of Visual Studio. So that is what we're going to be doing. Let me give you a little example here. So for those folks who are currently on Visual Studio 2008, right, this is how the product family looks like. Right at the top, you have something called Visual Studio Team System, the Team Suite. 2008 version, and just below that you have a Visual Studio Team Edition for developers, for testers, and for architects. So there are three separate editions. We kind of merged the database edition with the developer edition, so there's only three separate team editions available today. And then you have the Visual Studio Professional with MSDN Premium, and finally at the bottom you have Visual Studio Professional with MSDN Professional. This is currently what is there in the 2008 product family. So what we're going to be doing is, as part of the 2010 product family, number one, there's going to be only 3 editions of Visual Studio. You have Ultimate right at the top. The second one is Premium. I spoke about these two. I also spoke about the last one, which is called Visual Studio Professional. All of these 3 come with MSDN subscriptions. Now, this is the cool thing. On the 12th of April, you will automatically get transition. This is like amazing. So all of the users currently on Visual Studio, the team system, the team suite, right, and the Visual Studio, the team system, the team editions, it could be an architect or a developer or a test, all of the current users, licensed users of these technologies will automatically transition to something called Visual Studio 2010 Ultimate, which is equivalent to the team suite. So if you have a team edition today, you will be moving up the ladder to a team suite. So which means you will get architecture capabilities, development capabilities, and test capabilities, which is an amazing, amazing offer. Finally, if you have Visual Studio 2008, the MSDN Premium, right, what will happen is you will actually go into Visual Studio 2010 Premium with MSDN subscriptions. And Visual Studio 2008 Premium is equivalent to a Visual Studio Team Edition for developers and testers. So it's kind of equivalent to both of these editions clubbed together. So if you have a Visual Studio Professional today with MSDN Premium, you're actually moving up the ladder to a Team Edition role, which is again coming to you free of cost. And finally, if you have a Visual Studio 2008 Professional with an MSDN Professional, you would transition to a Visual Studio 2010 with an MSDN subscription. This is how it basically stacks up, after the launch. So again, another representation of how this works. So the suite and the team roles would transition to an ultimate role in 2010. A Visual Studio 2008 Professional with MSDN Premium would transition to a Visual Studio 2010 Premium. And finally, right at the bottom, you have the Visual Studio 2008 Professional with an MSDN Professional, which would transition into a Visual Studio 2010 with MSDN subscription. I've given here a couple of reference points for you folks. Of course, the first one is the download links for Visual Studio 2010. I would urge you all to go and download this today. It's a fantastic technology. It's going to blow your mind. You're going to become so much more productive. Just go and rock, folks. And then right at the bottom there's a bunch of information on Visual Studio. If you want more information from Microsoft, feel free to get in touch with me. My email is tejkumar@microsoft.com. With this, I would like to thank you all for attending this module on Introduction to Visual Studio 2010 Ultimate. Have a fantastic day, folks. Thank you so much.